Great. So thank you all for joining us today for the Pesticide Laws and Regulatory Framework Workshop. My name is Max Bendis. I'm a safety and education specialist with the Pesticides branch with the Department of Agriculture. And I have multiple partners here today. Mark, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Mark Rae Gee, UH Manoa Extension Agent in Pesticide Safety Education, working with Max. And we have some special guests today from HIOSH. They'll be presenting one section as well. So you guys introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Randall. I'm from HIOSH. I'm the Administration and Technical Support Branch Manager. I also have some of my program specialists.
So my name is Kevin, also from HIOSH. We're not on the enforcement side, so any of you guys who wonder about your guns. But I'm the supervisor for the same section, administrative services.
Great. So we really appreciate you guys coming in today, giving us your time. We're going to talk story about the laws, not just pertaining specifically to your pesticide use, but also some of the laws around pesticide use. So we have the HIOSH guys to talk about your OSHA compliance. We're going to talk about some DOT regulations, some FAA regulations, also some emergency planning and response laws that you all need to be aware of, since as restricted use applicators, you have access to some what's called acutely hazardous materials. And so if you are working with these acutely hazardous materials, you need to be very mindful of some of these hazmat laws that apply to your operation. So there's going to be opportunities to ask questions after my portion, after the HIOSH portion, and after Mark's portion. And in the end, we'll have more time to talk story and ask questions. We'll be sharing our contact information with you all. So if you have any more questions after the fact, you can, of course, call us, email us, get in touch with us. We're always available to answer questions. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'm going to cover the specific pesticide laws that we all need to be aware of when we are using pesticides, whether they are restricted use or general use. There we go. Okay, so bit of a content overview for you all. We are going to be covering the pesticide-specific laws, like I just mentioned. So C.F.R, WPS, the Hawaii pesticide laws, and also Act 45, which is the RUP reporting law. And then also we're going to cover the laws that deal with hazardous substances. So OSHA/HIOSH, the DOT, the FAA, and then those emergency planning and response laws, and then RTRA, that stands for the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. That has to do with how much hazardous waste you are producing over the course of a month, over the course of a year. So we'll get into all of that in more detail as we go on. So some of you might make a face like this when you think about the laws and regulations that are around the work that you do. These things tend to kind of get in the way. They tend to kind of be confusing. You know, I don't think most of us in this room are lawyers. I know certainly I'm not, you know, as disappointed as my dad might be. But today, we're going to turn those frowns upside down. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll all be walking out of here with a big, happy face spider smile between your cheeks. This is one of our endemic species here in Hawaii. I actually took this picture myself doing some field work for my old conservation job. So, you know, part of the reason why these laws exist is to protect the sensitive and special species, especially in a place here like Hawaii. So speaking of the law, it is your responsibility to know the law as the pesticide applicator. And there are consequences if you break the law. So you can be fined as much as $5,000 for private applicators. That fine can go all the way up to $41,000. I know that if I had to absorb a $41,000 fine, I would be declaring bankruptcy. So very important to understand these laws so that you can stay within the compliance side and not face any of these consequences. There is the possibility that some of these things could lead over into what would be considered a criminal offense, but that is very rare. That does not happen very often. You have to be doing something very, very dangerous and very, very harmful for that to be the case. For the most part, if you break one of these laws, you're going to get a warning letter, you're going to get a fine, but at the same time, you don't want to have to deal with any of that. So let's all make sure that we are compliant. So the first law that I'm going to talk about with you all today is FIFRA, or the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. So this is the baseline law that basically sets the standard for pesticide regulation in the United States. This is called Chapter 40 of the Code of Federal Regulation. So you might see like 40 C.F.R. Part 170. We're actually going to talk about that later. Those are the worker protection standard laws. People refer to these codes of federal regulations in this manner. So for 40 C.F.R., that covers all of the EPA's laws and regulations for how they run their administration. So specifically, FIFRA is this Chapter 40, which gives the EPA the authority to regulate pesticides. The EPA registers the pesticides. That's why they have that EPA registration number. And they also set the baseline standards for what has to be on a label and the types of environmental protections that pesticide applicators have to follow. Like I said, FIFRA is the baseline for pesticide laws. States have the ability to pass stricter versions of pesticide laws. They cannot make less strict versions. FIFRA is the minimum standard that all states apply to. But in Hawaii, like I said, we have lots of endangered species, lots of sensitive areas. So generally the pesticide laws in Hawaii are stricter than the pesticide laws for other states, and definitely stricter than the baseline pesticide laws that are established in FIFRA. So there are certain federally restricted pesticides. Those will have on their label the heading restricted use pesticide, but there are many state restricted pesticides here in Hawaii that are restricted because they are groundwater contaminants. Those might not necessarily have a heading on their label as a restricted use pesticide, but their access is restricted, so you can only get those things from the chemical suppliers here on island, and they will check your certification card before handing them over to you. But like I said, in Hawaii, they're restricted because they are environmental contaminants, not because they're more or less dangerous to people than they would be on the mainland. They're restricted to protect the environment. So FIFRA, aside from pesticide use, also establishes residue tolerances for agricultural products. So this is done in tandem with the FDA. But if you are a farmer and you are concerned about, residue checking on your crops, these are the laws that provide the authority for that process. So reading through FIFRA, understanding FIFRA can give you some more context for the type of work that you're doing in terms of complying with federal regulations. So the worker protection standard, like I mentioned, 40 C.F.R. Part 170. Oftentimes it is just referred to as the WPS. This is a federal standard which was passed to protect agricultural workers from pesticide residues. The WPS is a set of rules and laws that must be followed under certain circumstances. And those circumstances are when you are working with an agricultural plant and when the pesticide label has an agricultural use box on it. So the definition of an agricultural plant is essentially any plant or plant part which is grown in one place and intended for use in another. So if you're a landscaper and you have a nursery and you install plants in your client's yards, any pesticide applications that you do on your nursery are covered under the WPS. The stuff you do in your client's yard, not under the WPS. Those are not agricultural plants. Those are already installed. Those are residential plants. But, a lot of landscapers, they don't realize that they do have WPS compliance that they have to follow. Obviously, on a farm, it's super easy. Pretty much all your plants are agricultural plants. Pretty much all your products are going to have that ag use box on them because you are doing agricultural work. So pretty easy to understand the context for needing to follow the WPS there. But anytime you're working with an agricultural plant, anytime your pesticide label has that box, you must follow the WPS. And if you have any questions about specific WPS compliance, you can always contact me to set up a consultation. I do them free of charge. The WPS has some specific things that it covers in it. some keywords, the application exclusion zone, or AEZ. That's an area that you need to keep free from anyone around you while you are spraying. The restricted entry interval, that sets the amount of time that you have to wait before non-protected workers are able to enter into a treated area to, gather crops, to do irrigation work, to do weeding, to do anything. And it's worth mentioning that if you are weeding in an agricultural area, in a crop zone, that herbicide use will be covered under the WPS. Just because the weeds themselves are not an agricultural plant does not mean that you are not making an application to an area which has agricultural plants in it. In non-crop areas on your farm, those applications are not covered under the WPS, but we're kind of getting into the weeds of WPS compliance. I do that to kind of show you some of the intricacies in this process. And to really stress, if you have questions about this, please call me for a consultation. We also have a WPS handbook to help you comply. It's pretty long. It's about an inch thick. So there's quite a lot of laws here in the WPS. I'm really just giving you guys an overview. But some requirements for the worker protection standard include displaying your application information. It includes providing medical access and assistance for your employees, giving them training about pesticide dangers and how to avoid pesticide residues, as well as posting the REI signs and providing the appropriate PPE for your employees. It is the employer's responsibility to provide PPE that is required by the label for all pesticide applications which your employees are doing at work. Okay, so the Hawaii pesticide laws. We've talked about some of the federal standards. Now we're going to talk about some of the state-specific laws. There are two main state laws that we should all be aware of when we're using pesticides. And those are the Hawaii Administrative Rules, Chapter 4, Section 66, and the Hawaii Revised Statute, Chapter 149A, otherwise known as the Hawaii Pesticide Law. So Chapter 149A, the Hawaii Pesticide Law, that is the state version of C.F.R. That establishes the specific laws for the state of Hawaii when it comes to pesticide usage. The Hawaii Administrative Rules, Chapter 4-66, that is how our department runs the things that we do. Those are our administrative rules, and they kind of explain why we do things we do, why our certification program is the way that it is, how our enforcement branch is set up. So these two laws work in tandem for, one, informing us to how to do our job, but also informing you all why we do things the way that we do. And you may have questions, why does the pesticide branch do things this way? This seems really inefficient. This seems really frustrating for me as an applicator. The reason oftentimes is we must comply with our own laws in terms of how we operate and how we do things. So especially when it comes to the types of things that are covered on the exam and the way that we give the exam, those things are codified into law. We do have some flexibility. We are able to make changes, but there are certain things that we cannot be flexible about that we must comply with. And as a state agency, it is a very bad look if we are not complying with our own law. There are some important sections that I want to highlight for you all when it comes to these two laws. Reading through a legal document can be a little bit daunting, especially if you don't speak legalese. There's a lot of seemingly extra words. The copy that you're looking at may have a lot of redactions and just crossed out lines. That can be very, very confusing. So I want to kind of pick out some specific points that you guys can either look up later when you want to reference these things, or just have an understanding of where these things are in the law and why they exist the way that they do. So the Hawaii Pesticide Law, Part 3 of that law pertains to pesticide use. A lot of these laws pertain to licensing and registration, which is not relevant for the most part for the people in this room. We are concerned with pesticide use and the laws around that. So that is in Part 3 of the Hawaii Pesticide Law. 149A-31 lists the prohibited acts. So what you cannot do as an applicator. Definitely worth reading through that, understanding that. they're all things that we already know, don't pour your pesticide into, streams or bodies of water, manage your drift, follow the label is the law, that kind of thing. But it's always worth knowing where those things are and at least reading through them once if you've never done so before. Part 34 has to do with the denial, suspension, and revocation of your restricted use pesticide certificate. So there are cases where we are able to revoke your certificate, especially if we find out that you're lying to us about your restricted use pesticide reporting or anything to do with taking the exam. So it's good for you. It's actually crucial for you to understand what those situations are, so you know what your rights are in terms of access to the certification that you have earned through the course of taking the exam. So, if for whatever reason in the future, a rogue agent of the pesticide branch is trying to take your certificate for a trumped up reason, this is where you would go to the law to be able to make your case of, I have not broken any of these rules, you cannot take my certification away. Also, just to understand how and why we do things the way that we do. And then the last part of 149A, which I wanted to point out, is section 36, which establishes our authority to inspect you. So I am not an enforcement agent. I'm not an inspector. I'm an educator. It's a safe space. You guys can tell me things. You'll never get in trouble for talking to me. But our branch does have the authority to inspect you and does have the authority to issue fines and warnings. And that is codified into law here. For the Hawaii administrative rules, 466, there's quite a bit more in this law that is immediately relevant to pesticide use. The definition of a restricted use pesticide is in this law. The special local needs labels that accompany some pesticides here are in this law. You don't generally need to worry about special local needs labels. When you buy your pesticide from the chemical distributor, it will have the special local needs label attached to it. You have a list of special local needs labels on our website, so you can double check and verify that any of the products that you are currently using might need a special local needs label. If you did not get one from the chemical distributor, that is their error. You're not going to get in trouble for that, but it is a requirement for you to have the special local needs label with you, just the same as you would need to have the regular pesticide label with you as well. 466-43, that establishes more of the rules and the way that we do our enforcement process. So if you have any questions about, the process for receiving a warning letter, or receiving a fine, or how we evaluate those things, that's where it's codified into our laws. Pesticide disposal is listed in 466-55. Very important for us all to understand and know to make sure we are disposing of old bottles and rinse it appropriately. And, I might as well mention old bottles, triple rinse, puncture, remove the cap, put in the trash. All the rinsate from rinsing bottles or rinsing your equipment gets applied as per the label instructions. So just because it's diluted to below its effective rate doesn't mean it isn't still a diluted pesticide product and needs to be disposed of according to the label. If it's not disposed of according to the label, then it becomes hazardous waste. And that is a whole other can of worms that we're going to talk about later. But don't let your pesticides become hazardous waste. Use them and clean your bottles, and you should be fine after that. Chapter 466-56, and actually multiple sections after that, have to do with the actual certification process. So what is in our exams, what the different categories of certification mean, all of that is in 4-66. It's codified into law. And then this is another really important clause that all of us certified applicators should be aware of, 466-61, which is the law regarding the supervision of non-certified applicators. So it is legally allowable for non-certified applicators to use a restricted use pesticide when they are under the direct supervision of a certified applicator. They need to be given a set of written instructions, and the certified applicator needs to be available to answer questions and intervene if needed. So the specifics about what has to be in those written instructions, excuse me, is codified into law here in this section. So if that is anything that you are doing at work, which is not entirely uncommon, especially for the fumigation industry, this is very common in the fumigation industry, it's very important for you to understand these laws. And at any time, while you guys are reading through these, if you have questions, I am available for phone calls, for emails. I can help clarify things as best I'm able to. But what I always tell people at the end of the day, you know, if we're talking about legal compliance and gray areas of am I compliant, am I not? I'm not the person that you need to convince. At the end of the day, it's the judge who's presiding over your case that you're going to need to convince. So if we issue you a warning or a citation and you say, that's not right, I was following the law, I should not have to pay this, you're going to have to convince the judge of that, not us. So, Act 45. This is the law that has to do with restricted use pesticide record keeping. So your P45 Part 1 and Part 2, which you guys submit to us every year, this is where those laws come from. So there's a lot of stuff that you need to keep records of and keep track of. It seems like a pretty daunting list to remember all of these things, but fortunately, that's why we have this form, P45 Part 2. So if you do use restricted use pesticides, your P45 Part 1 is your attestation. Basically, you're just saying, yes, I did use pesticide, restricted use pesticides this year. And so this form is where you would record all of your RUP usage. So what I recommend is that when you do use RUPs, don't wait until the end of the year and transfer over your application records to this form. Just use this form to keep track of all of your restricted use pesticide usage. You can also use this form to keep track of your general use pesticide usage, but know that when you submit it to us, you need to remove all of the GUP usage from the form. We will return it back to you. We will not process it if your form is messy, if it has a bunch of extra information on it. But this form, which is available on our website, this table, has everything in it that you're going to need. So you don't need to remember that big list of things unless you're taking the exam. We are going to ask you to know those things on the exam. But this form exists so that you can help keep track of those things. And that P45 submission is annual. Basically, they're due on January 30th of the following year for each year. So for 2025, your P45s are due January 30th of 2026.
Can you just go back to that other slide, the previous?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So the last piece of pesticide law that we need to be aware of is the label itself. There are certain language that's used in labels, which is important to understand. There are some things that are requirements and other things that are suggestions. There are lists that are inclusive, and there are lists that are more broad and include other things that are not listed. So a quick overview of pesticide language on labels: must, are required to. That is a requirement. You must do those things. Should is a suggestion. You must wear all appropriate PPE according to the label. You should wash your hands before eating, chewing tobacco, going to the bathroom, chewing gum. There is a distinction in the language. PPE must be worn. Probably a good idea to wash your hands after doing stuff. Just gonna say. Such as, including. So, especially for agricultural products, your label could say, you know, labeled for use on stone fruits, such as peaches and plums. Those are finite lists. So when it says such as or including, anything that's listed there, that's it. So if my label said it was good for peaches, but I had a bunch of plums that I wanted to apply on, too bad. My label is not labeled for plums. It's only labeled for peaches. But if it said stone fruits, including but not limited to peaches, then I would be able to apply to plums, because plums are a stone fruit. And so they are included in that classification, in that list. Because what matters most when you're looking at a label is not the pest, but the site. So if the site is listed, you may apply the pesticide. If the site is not listed, you cannot apply that pesticide. So the label itself sets the standard for what you can and cannot do. You may not apply higher dosages than what is listed on the label. You may not mix higher concentrations than what is listed on the label. And you may not make more frequent applications than what your label allows. So there could be something like a retreatment interval, or they could say, do not make applications more than 7 days apart. That is basically your retreatment interval. Very important to read your entire label, not just the section on mixing and loading, so that you can understand all of the requirements that you have to follow when you are applying a pesticide. But there are things that you may do which may not be explicitly listed on your label. So you may apply lower concentrations than what is listed. Some labels will explicitly prohibit this, and generally it's not advised to apply at lower rates because your pest control is not guaranteed, and you could be contributing to the development of resistance within that pest community. So if you are applying below the label rate, only do so if you know for a fact that you are going to get good pesticidal action with that rate. So do some tests. You are allowed to apply lower, so you don't need to get an experimental use permit for those types of things. But again, generally recommendation, just apply within the label rates. You can also apply to an unlisted pest, so long as your site is listed. So that's what I was saying earlier. The site is what matters when you are applying a pesticide and you are looking at a label. If the pest specifically is not named, that's okay. You can still make an application against that pest. There may not be a guarantee that the pesticide is going to work the same way it would against a labeled pest. But, if we're talking about species of aphids here, and the label is, woolly aphids do this. Aphids are aphids for the most part. Soft-bodied insects like that, there's a reasonable guarantee that that application is going to work. But the site is what matters when you are interpreting and reading the label. You can also use any application method that is not explicitly prohibited by the label. So soil drenching is pretty common for a lot of products. Just so long as your label does not prohibit soil drenching, you are allowed to apply it in that manner, even if it doesn't have a specific soil drench section to determine what your application rate or what your application method is going to be. If you're confident in what you're doing, if you know it's going to work, you are allowed to do that. But generally, I recommend using products that are labeled for specific application techniques so that you can be certain that what you're doing is going to work. Because the label, aside from just telling you how much to mix and where to apply, there can also be really useful tips and tricks for how to make your application better. So there's a lot of rigorous work that goes into developing these labels and developing these products. And by reading the label, you get the benefit of all the work and effort that has gone into that process. You can also mix with fertilizer when not explicitly prohibited. And along with that, you can mix with other pesticides and other adjuvants, so long as it is not explicitly prohibited. That is kind of the theme for the right side of this slide. You can do these things so long as your label does not prohibit you from doing so. So again, read through the entire label so that you can be aware of any and all restrictions that are relevant to your pesticide usage. So that completes the portion for specific pesticide laws. I want to take maybe like 5 minutes right now to answer any questions that you have about what I just covered. Yeah.
Max, if the pre-harvest interval says 7 days, is that it? 168 hours?
Yes, from the end of the application, unless your label says from the end of the REI.
Okay.
But my understanding is that pre-harvest intervals, that interval begins at the end of the application.
Use of adjuvants, if it recommends use of adjuvants on the label, is it okay not to use it?
Yes, so the language is going to be important. If the label says it must be applied along with like a non-ionic surfactant, that's not a recommendation. That is a requirement. You must do that. Oftentimes, products can be mixed directly with an adjuvant, especially in cases where it is a requirement. Oftentimes, that's going to be the case. So, problem solved for you there. But it's going to be language specific. So you can always, so if you guys have questions about label interpretation, you can also email me, call me. I can look up the label using our database or online somewhere else. We can talk about it. We can go through it literally word by word, and I can help you understand what your requirements are at certain conditions. But yeah, excellent question. And worth pointing out, if you are adding an adjuvant to your pesticide, that adjuvant may have stricter PPE requirements than the pesticide itself. So read that label and also have that SDS on site. That is your requirement, just like the SDS is for all of your pesticides. Any other questions? Yeah.
What is your website?
So our website has a bunch of like slashes and stuff on the end of it because of, plant industry HDOA stuff. The easiest way to find our website is to Google HDOA pesticides. That's how I do it, and I work there. So yeah, that is my recommendation. It's something like hdoa.gov/PI/pesticides. Just Google it. Okay, if that's all the questions we have for this portion, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our HIOSH representatives, and they're going to cover your specific OSHA compliance within the context of pesticide use.
Thank you so much. It's so funny, when they first invited us, my head is thinking, why us? HIOSH, right? HIOSH is OSHA, but for pesticides specifically, there's a lot of stuff that we don't cover. Now I understand why, because a lot of the stuff that we don't cover, they actually cover. Just like Mark said, their law is 40 C.F.R. Ours is 29 C.F.R. So for HIOSH, all of these are very, very basic. But for us, there's mainly 3 parts. Okay. Number 1, the people who works. Number 2, the material or process that they use. Number 3 is your company's policies. So our law is designed around these things. So for pesticide, we don't cover pesticide itself, but we cover everything around it. For example, for pesticide use, there's HASCOM, there's respiratory protection program, there's sanitations program. Let me give you an example for field sanitations. We don't cover how you handle the pesticide. However, we do handle the stuff around it, meaning that do you provide potable water for your employees? Do you provide emergency eye wash, showers, that kind of stuff? So for more details, because there's a lot to cover, I cannot go into exact detail for every standard, what entails, but I can give you an overview. Right? So for field sanitations, you need to have potable drinking water, toilet facility, and washing facilities, minimizing heat stress. All of these are for employees. Like Mark said, not enforcement. I used to be. So right now, I like what he says. This is a safe space. You guys can ask me any question you like, and there's no consequences. But we do also have an enforcement branch. Our fines, it's a little bit higher than theirs, and we're brutal. We showed up, we said, there's no alternative. It's just because, just like he said, our HRS had a very defined rules saying that what we can do, what we will be doing, that kind of stuff. And all of these standards, because there's so much, we are incorporated by our HAR 12-60. It's the incorporation, all of the 29 C.F.R. rules over there. As now, we cover only the program side, the training part. We don't cover the label because the label part is covered by EPA. We also keep record. We also regulate record keeping. These are the stuff that tells us how well you guys are doing. So, for example, anytime you have occupational related injuries, like hospitalizations, accidents, even fatalities, you need to tell us. OSHA will look at all these data to reflect how your company does. Just like Mark said, it's a lot of details is so frustrated, how you guys do things this way, why you guys showed up, even though I don't have injuries. As you guys know, pesticide is one of the most hazardous materials that any employee could have handled. So that's why there's a lot of laws, a lot of different agencies regulates pesticide itself. But because there's so many agencies, myself sometimes even get confused. I remember when I first started, I was shadowing one of my senior guys, went to one local farm. I went there, do an inspection. I see that they don't have SDS, they don't have, PPE that normally people would require to use. I wanted to issue citations on them, but however, my senior told me that you cannot because they're using pesticide on a farm. And they have less than 10 employees. So with all of these rules, even though we see there's a hazards, we cannot issue any citations. So what do we do? Like as employee yourself, we follow these hazard controls. The easiest way to look at it is when you look at your product, right? Pesticide, follow all the labels. And then you look at your processes. What are you doing with that pesticide? Are you spraying? Are you putting it base station or tenting or whatever? HIOSH will look at your hazard based on these charts over here. So I always give an example how you control these hazards. Let's say, for example, you are Army general, right? You're going to send your employees to patrol in an enemy ground. The risk is being shot by enemy. So how do you control that risk? The best part is eliminations. Get rid of that need to do that. A lot of times you cannot because you guys are pesticide, right? You cannot get rid of pesticide. So one step down is substitution. Can you use something that is not as potent as the one that you guys are using? If you can use it, subsidize it, the risk is low. If you cannot, go one more, engineering control. So separate people from the hazards. Can you drive like a bubble car without exposing your employees? If you can, then that'll be great, right? Effective. And if not, go down to one step is administrative control. How often do you spray? Just like Mark said, follow the label because the people who make that pesticide already did all the work for you guys. There's like frequencies, there's dosage, just like Mark said, just follow that, to minimize your exposure. And then the last part is give your employee PPE, give them bulletproof vest, go. As you can see, like which one is more effective, right? So for us, OSHA, when we come to your site, when we look at what you do, we always look at these. And if you, just like DOA, our standard is minimum. If you can't even follow the minimum, usually there will be citations. The law is brutal. This is current penalties, up to $16,000. And if it's a repeat or willful meaning that you know what needs to be done, and you know what? I'm just not gonna follow the law. And it will be that much. And then per our revised statutes, every year we have to adjust our penalties according to inflation. So this number will never go down because there's always going to be inflation. And I understand that it sucks and it's brutal, but because the way that our law is written like this, there's no other ways to deal with it. My suggestion is try to follow as much as possible. We do have a consultation and training branch, and then I do outreach. My branch do a lot of outreach. You can invite us to your place. Consultation and training branch will come out and inspect the workplace, tell you what needs to be fixed. There's no citations, no penalties. My suggestion is to better prevent it rather than the enforcement guy showed up. Because when an enforcement guy showed up, there's very little that I can do. And then also, just like I said, I like that because he laid down on the ground for me. We issue a citation for something that we say you did. You don't agree with it, right? I always suggest everybody go contest, meaning that go talk to the judge, because not only, I'm not saying that we're always right. Sometimes our inspectors need that challenge to understand what they're doing. I always invite people, if you don't agree with us, go contest, because we make mistakes too. We're also humans. And some of our inspectors have less experience than the others. Some of them, they just maybe like, oh, I forgot something. So if you don't agree with us, come talk to our manager. If you still don't agree, go contest. There are different ways to mitigate the citations, so to speak. Fine, this one. It's super important. For those of you working, Hawaii has anti-discrimination law, which is on our statutes. Hawaii revised statute chapter 396, that's 8. So anybody who involved or participating in any ocean-related activity, meaning that, let's say, for example, I went to your site, inspect you, and I interview you. Your boss cannot retaliate against you. They cannot cut your hours, they can terminate you, they cannot adjust your work hours so ridiculous that nobody can do. You know, that kind of stuff. Or come in 2 hours from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., go home, and then come in at 1 a.m., that kind of stuff. Also, if you bring up safety and health concern, let's say, for example, you're a sprayer, right? I need a respirator. I talked to my boss, your boss said, all right, my boss said, you know what, no need, I did this for 30 years, never need a respirator. No, I really do need it because the label says we need it and all that stuff. And then the boss like, you know what, go home, you're done for the day. That's retaliations. Call us. Even though we're horrible in the enforcement side, I'm proud to say that our anti-retaliation program is pretty successful. We're the top 5 in the nation. I know this because I always go to conference, talk to our state, and our workers in Hawaii, I can proud to say that our protection is pretty good as far as retaliation. So don't be afraid to speak up. I overheard them asking, some of you guys asking translation service. We do all of it because we're state agents. Traditional Chinese, Korean, Tagalog, Ilocano, Thai, all these languages we can provide, even with different Pacific Island languages or Micronesian languages, we have translators. Don't be afraid to speak up. Know your rights. Some people will think that they're on the bottom of they're on the bottom. They don't have right. My boss gave me a job. I'm blessed to work here. No, you also have your right. Don't get complacent. That's I want to suggest you guys to do. With all these laws, I want to get back to it. So there's different types of law, different specific like law, and to navigate it is super difficult because different agencies responsible for different parts of it. Just the HASCOM itself. If you're using pesticide itself, HASCOM it's labeling and right to know law. If you're using pesticide, it doesn't apply to you. However, it does apply to you when it comes to training and for your protections. You have the program to specify what your intentions are, that kind of stuff. With all of these confusion, we have one law that I think all of you should know about. It's our general duty clause. So when all the laws doesn't apply, when there is a hazards, when I say all the law, meaning that our law, EPA's law, DOH law, DOA's law doesn't apply. We can use this general duty. It's a general duty, meaning that it's generally the law require all the employers to provide a safe and healthy working environment for the employees. We can use that law to go against some people that is, not following the rules. Right? Yeah. And if you have any questions, contact us. This is our website. There's a lot of slashes also. This is our general phone number. And again, we do have a consultation training branch. They are a little bit different from us. We come out, talk to people just like you guys, but they have to be invited by individual employers. So if you are employers, if you see the needs, I'm using pesticide, I don't know how to be compliant, call us, schedule with them. If you're employees, talk to your boss. These guys will come out, do a full blown inspections, but there's no citations. So there's way better than enforcement guys. Enforcement guys will come out to your site basically on two things. Number one, program planning, meaning that it's planned, like you are on a high hazard, it's agriculture, you know, that kind of stuff. Secondly, it's unprogrammed, meaning that you have an incident, somebody get injured, somebody was killed, that kind of stuff. Then we'll go on to your site, or there's a complaint. We do take complaints. I don't know if there's more. Yep, that's all I have for HIOSH. If you guys have any questions. Yes, ma'am.
It's a little bit of separate thing, but
Yeah.
because you've been an inspector, is only an eye wash station required or an actual shower facility for people who regularly spray?
Depending on what you're using.
Yeah.
So going back to the labeling part, if you're using pesticides, always follow the label. If you have other chemicals other than the pesticide, follow the SDS. So SDS, the safety data sheets will tell you if it's corrosive, if there's anything that can harm your eyes and skin.
Yeah.
You need to have an emergency eye wash or emergency shower. It tells you.
Can I interject here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're in agriculture, it's the pesticide laws would take over there for WPS, so you need to have, for each worker and for each handler of pesticides, you're gonna have to have a different amount of water or showers, right?
Yeah.
And the decon kit also requires single-use towels, so, and coveralls or some sort of clothing that's, universal as well.
That's why, like, it's confusing. Pesticide has their own, right? But if it's not pesticide, you look at the SDS. But my suggestion is easy. Let's say you have 10 different chemicals, right? Some are more strict, some are more lax, right? Just follow the most strict ones. Because there's no room against doing stricter stuff. But if you're doing more lax stuff, then if they find one chemical that's out of the norm, you'll get big, definitely.
Also, like for pesticides as well, like the FDF is gonna have way more information for the doctor on it, for your like storage, handling, that sort of thing, than the label. Labels usually have very short things in there, but not too much information. So have both with you, yeah.
I can give you guys one more example. So our program also do VPP, Voluntary Protection Program. These are the employers has exemplary safety records. They do super well. I'm not gonna tell you which company. I think you guys know. It's a very big farm operations in the state of Hawaii. So years ago, I did a review on their VPP. They're using pesticide, of course. And I almost turned it down for them because they don't follow SDS. They follow strictly, which is good. The label provides you all those details and stuff. Our thing is DOA, EPA, and OSHA, different agencies. We govern different sites. You follow the label, all the details you good, it's good for EPA. But with OSHA, you need a little bit more steps. You need to have SDS on site, just like Max said. You need to have both on site actually. People working, you need to know how to access them. And I almost ding them for that. I ultimately give them a grace period for them to fix it because it's a VPP, not an enforcement. They fix it, then it's fine. It's just that because the stuff that you guys are using has so many different agencies built on different parts. You just have to be really, really careful on what you did. The pesticide itself, I strongly suggested follow labels and then have SDS inside. Read the SDS, anything that accommodate, following this product. Let's say some of them require to have eye wash, some of them require to use respirator, some of them don't. Follow that. And again, if there are two different things contradicting to each other, look at which one is more strict. follow the chart that I was showing you guys. Which one can provide your employee maximum protection? Do that. For example, I'm sawing my 2x4 at home, right? Can I use a respirator? I mean, can I use a respirator to protect myself? Of course. Do I need it? Probably not. That kind of stuff. Don't be afraid to speak up, seriously. Speak up. Context.
Example here too. I think this will help kind of understand, and this is kind of the point of us doing this today, is
Yeah.
getting all the different laws and regulatory framework in one place. So for example, you work on a farm, right? You're gonna spray something, it's pesticides, right? But you're using a Haggie to do it. So the label on the pesticide said you need chemical resistant boots. But for OSHA, you also have a rollover risk on your toe, so you need a safety toe chemical resistant boot.
Exactly.
You don't have the choice of wearing two different kinds of boots at once, right? So you need to be aware of all these different laws from different agencies and try to mesh that in a way that it works in your context that you're working in, right? That's the point of us doing this today, with all the different, pointing out all the different types of laws that are applicable to you in your work. Thanks.
Same example, right? If you showed up, you're just wearing the chemical boots, no steel toe, you still get sold. It's all like, oh, you follow the label, yeah, but not the SP. But if you're wearing steel toe chemical boots, none of us can do it. And you're well protecting your employees. Right? Any questions? All right, thank you.
Okay. I guess to follow up in the last section here, I get the scraps with the, in terms of laws here, and move this side. We hope in the future to be able to do a deep dive in each section. So we'll do one with HIOSH deep dive, another 2-hour session or 3-hour session later in the year, something like that. Max can do another WPS and C.F.R section deep dive. We hope also to get the DOT people to do a deep dive as well, but I'll introduce that for them since we weren't able to get them today, as well as the FAA stuff and RCRA and emergency response laws. So also in the SDS, which is another reason that you need to have it, for transportation, there's a transportation section in the SDS that is going to tell you what the DOT requires in order to transport. Transporting means on a public road. So if you're an ag and you're just driving around on a farm, that's not transportation if you're just on your farm, right? But if you're on a farm, then, or let's say you go to Nutrient on Cunha Road and then you drive back on Cunha Road to your farm, that's transporting a pesticide, right? So in the transportation section, there will be information on requirements, placarding that you need to have on your car. You're gonna, like depending on what you're transporting and how much of it, you may or may not need to have a CDL, blah, blah, blah. These are some of the requirements here for the Department of Transportation if you're going to transport pesticides. There must be original containers, must have DOT approved signage, and that's going to be in your SDS as well. So like we can see already there's like 2 or 3 agencies right here that require an SDS, right? Yeah. We have like the C.F.R stuff, we have OSHA stuff, and then we have DOT, right? So have your SDSs. It's part of many laws to have them on hand and train people on that, right? Yeah, pesticides cannot be transported in the same vehicle as food or feed products. I think that's kind of obvious, but it is in a law, right? And if there's an accident on a public road, you need to notify the Department of Transportation, okay? I'll go into a little bit more detail on this part later, especially with the hazardous chemicals, emergency response law stuff. But if it happens on a public road, you need to inform the Department of Transportation. If it happens off a public road or on a public road, you may need to inform 3 other people as well. Okay, and if this is mostly for dealers, but like shipping, like from the mainland to here, so like on a boat or an airplane or something like that, any spills need to get reported. And there's specific transportation restrictions and information in the SDSs regarding shipping pesticides. I doubt any of you are gonna be doing that for your, like, you know, your golf course, your farm or whatever like that, but anyways, it's there. DOT does require security plans for, transporting hazardous materials from one place to another. Transporting means on a public road, right? But farmers are exempt from this security plan thing, so you're lucky if you're a farmer. You're not lucky if you're not. We will try to do a deep dive on this with the Department of Transportation in the future. So if you're interested in this, yeah, let us know, and then we'll try to make it sooner rather than later. Okay, the main two things to keep in mind, because there's a lot of rules around this, and it's the DOT stuff is kind of harder to find on the internet, information on it, than OSHA, for example, or C.F.R. Main two things to keep in your mind. Check the transportation section in the SES. It's gonna have a lot of information for you in there. Okay, especially if it's an acutely toxic or like acutely hazardous material, it will have more information in there. And then ask your supplier. So if you're buying from BEI or Simplot or whatever, or Nutrient, ask them, what are the rules for transporting this? You know, they have CDL drivers that transport the stuff all the time, so they're gonna know. Okay. I should ask for questions on this before I jump to the next one, because it's gonna get into a very different topic. Yeah, what's up?
Is this like, you know, these DOT requirements just for restricted use pesticide or is it general use as well?
This is all hazardous materials. So it's kind of the same thing as HIOSH, right? They're not really thinking about like pesticide classifications, right? They're thinking about hazardous materials, hazardous communication, right? So anything that is deemed a hazardous material, and we'll get into some definitions here in a minute too, that'll kind of help like explain that a little bit more here. Yeah. And if,
Can I say something?
yeah,
So, the only restricted use pesticide specific law that we've talked about today is Act 45 for RUP reporting. Otherwise, all of these laws pertain whenever you're using any pesticide. Even if it's something as like innocuous, seemingly innocuous as neem oil, that is still a pesticide. It has an EPA registration number. That means you must follow and be compliant with all of these laws.
thank you, Max.
Good question though, Jenna.
Okay. No other questions. I'll jump to the next section, okay? Again, in the future, we hope to do a deep dive with people from the FAA for more information, but we do have, there might be some questions. Why are we talking about FAA rules, right? We do have some stakeholders, maybe here, maybe not, that use helicopters for conservation work, that spray, you know, on cliffs and stuff like that. Or UAVs for the coconut rhinoceros beetle, you know, they're flying up the crown of palm trees and spraying, right? If you're using manned aircraft or unmanned aircraft, so like UAVs or piloted aircraft, there are different laws that apply to you with the FAA. And some of them get a little bit weird, right? Generally speaking, you're gonna need a license to do anything commercially anyways, right? You're gonna need a pilot's license to fly an airplane. If you're doing any kind of work that's using a UAV, you're gonna need a license. Before you get a license, you're gonna have to study about all these things like what are the licensing requirements, the airspace, aircraft safety, record keeping, like maintenance stuff. Yeah, you're gonna know all that stuff, so I'm not gonna really get into detail now, but just be aware that if you do that, you need to follow these laws and get licensed. This first law over here, so like all these C.F.R. things, this is Code of Federal Regulations, right? For manned aircraft, this is stating that you need a license. 14 C.F.R. 4107, this is for unmanned aerial vehicles, so you'll need a license if you're doing this for commercial purposes. Interesting thing of note here is Part 107 specifically excludes hazardous materials on the UAV. So it says in Part 107, you may not have hazardous materials on a UAV. So if you want to spray with a drone, Part 137 is kind of like what you'll have to follow to be able to do that. You have part of the process of getting this AAOC, which is required for you to be using or carrying any hazardous material on a UAV, is that you're going to have to apply for an exemption as part of this process. It's like step 2 out of 5 or something like that. So, but the main point here is you're going to have to apply for an exemption. You're going to have to follow a long process. And in the end, if you're going to apply using a UAV, you need to have a valid AAOC in your hand at the time of your operation. There's a lot of detail in here. Hopefully we can get someone from the FAA in the future to kind of shed some light on that if you guys are interested. Any questions here? Because I'm about to move, I think. Big picture first. Okay. There's this next section is about emergency response laws, and I also threw our CRA in here, even though it's not technically considered an emergency response law, but it is related. They all play on each other. Actually, if you can see today, all of these laws kind of play on each other, right? There's a common theme of hazardous materials, hazardous material communication. You need to have SDSs for multiple purposes, blah, 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 blah. These laws are even more tightly intertwined, so I want to give you guys some exposure to them. The big one is C.F.R. So this is the big law concerning emergency response. EPCRA, also known as C.F.R. Title III, also known as the Superfund Amendment, is part of C.F.R. It's like a later thing that got tacked on the end of it. These basically say that if there is an accident, responsibility is yours, right? And this is what needs to happen. So this Community Right to Know Act in there. You have to do reporting. There's planning requirements if you have a certain amount of inventory. Yeah, and then the RCRA is on your generator status. So your company, how much hazardous waste are you producing? And it's not part of an emergency response or planning thing, but the terminology, the forms that you use, the like reporting stuff is all the same like kind of deal. So I tagged it in here. Okay, so C.F.R. is a big one, but you're probably gonna just pay attention or know this by C.F.R. Title III or Superfund Amendment. Anyways, the big things to know here is that there are two kind of classifications of things that you need to worry about in terms of reporting. One is for incidents. So if you have a spill, there's a reportable quantity associated with each chemical, right? So like in a pesticide, you might have 2 or 3 active ingredients and a bunch of inert ingredients, right? It's not asking you about your pesticide product. It's asking you about the active ingredients in those. Okay, so we'll go into a little bit more information on this, but if you want more later, we can do a deep dive in a different session. Main thing is that if something happens in an emergency, you have a spill on the road, right? You drive up the nutrient and back down and someone T-bones you or head-ons you on Punia Road, right? And you have pesticides all over the road. You need to report if a reportable quantity has been met to the local emergency planning committee. This is like a combination of different government agencies, a fire department. You have to report to them, and you have to report in 2 ways. One is a verbal one. You have to call them immediately and say, yo, this happens. And then a follow-up later written. It's kind of hard to know how many gallons or pounds of active ingredient that just got spilled on the road right when it happened, but you should really call the fire department now, right? So that's why it's like that. There's a Hawaii State Emergency Response Commission. They're in charge of like the framework on this. National Response Center. There's usually a phone number on the label. Oh, sorry, this is kind of fair. Anyways, the National Response Center's gotta report to them. Fire department is like your first point of contact, pretty much. You call them, they'll kind of walk you through the process. And if it's on the road, you have to report this to DOT as well. Good to know, but main point here is if you have a spill, you're gonna be freaking out, right? Especially if you're on a road, you just got in a car accident, you got adrenaline stuff. Call 911, they'll kind of walk you through the process. You just gotta let them know what's going on. And very important to have the SDSs with you in your hands as you're transporting, because this is information that they need. Okay. Whew. Before you get there, where you would get the point that you have a reportable quantity, hopefully you're checking out what you have in your inventory and you know how much of each active ingredient that you have. Because if you reach a certain threshold, certain number of these different active ingredients in your inventory, you must have a emergency response plan with these agencies already, so that they know when you have an incident, what's going on and who you are, what you're talking about, okay? So we'll go through a little bit how to work through this, but just be aware, same people, but there's a different context, right? One is for incidents that happen, and one is like if your inventory gets over a certain amount, you need to have a plan on what's gonna happen in an emergency. Okay. This is the EPA list of lists. It's like the weirdest name for a list I've ever seen in my life, but this is where you get your information on your products, okay? So like if you have, whatever pesticide it is, or, adjuvant or whatever you have, right? The active ingredients will be listed here. And you can see that a lot of the active ingredients have like almost the same name, right? So in an emergency during a spill, it's probably better to reference the CAS number. This is often on labels. We'll take a look at this in a second. It's easier, like especially if you have PDF in your, like on your phone or your laptop, you can just Control F and then search the CAS number. You'll get the right one instead of trying to figure out which one of these three is the one you're looking at. Often your products will have more than one active ingredient, so you need to look at the different active ingredients on there. And then we have all these weird acronyms over here, but the main point here is that there's reportable quantities and threshold planning quantities, or threshold quantities, right? Just the different acronym are pretty much the same thing. These are like all the laws, even RCRA is here, right? This is what matters. So your reportable quantity is going to be lower, right? So if you have a spill of this much, you need to report to those 3 or 4 agencies, right? If you have this much in your inventory, you need to make a plan with them before you purchase, right? Like before you get that amount, you need to make a plan with them on what happens if there's an emergency. Okay, and then on the right side, and you can also see that there's several columns for reportable quantities. This is the original law, CERCLA. This is EPCRA. This is the amendment to that law. They're gonna have different numbers, but the result is the same. You have to report it, right? Okay. RCRA, this is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. Thank you. This is telling you what, this law is telling you what your generator status is with the EPA for hazardous waste. Some of these chemicals are going to have a code associated with them. If it has a P on it, we'll go through this later, but if it has a P on it, that means it's acutely hazardous material, and then there's tighter restrictions around it, like much tighter restrictions. So the list of lists has all of this information on it. It's scary at first because there's a lot of acronyms, but you got to know this stuff, especially if you're handling acutely toxic pesticides. Okay. Does anybody have questions on this before I change? Yeah, what's up?
Are there reportable quantities on the SDS?
That's a good question.
I don't think they are.
Yeah, okay, I don't remember. But it will have the CAS number on there. You can just look it up in a list of lists. It's really fast. But you need to know this kind of stuff, like what you have in your inventory.
It's also worth mentioning that Viking is considered an acutely hazardous material, and that is basically the RUP which is used in the structural fumigation industry. So something to keep in mind.
Yep. Thank you for that, Max. Yeah, there's a lot of these. Well, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are a significant number of pesticides which you will use, which I'm not saying you will, which are used in quantities where this is totally relevant to applicators employed. So know what this is and know where to look it up. Okay, and it's super simple. If you just Google EPA list of lists, it's going to pop up. You can download the Excel or just look at it online or whatever, right? It's there. But keep in mind, if you like search Tilone fumigant, it's not going to show up as Tilone in there. It's going to have chlorpicrin. It's going to have like, I forget what the other too long of a name, right?
Sulfuro chloride.
For Tilone is.
Oh, wait, no, that's right. That's for Viking.
Yeah. Something else. Anyway, whatever. It'll be in there, right? but it's gonna be 2 different ingredients with 2 different reportable quantities and 2 different threshold planning quantities. Woo! Okay, I gotta catch my breath for the next one. But there's information for like 2 types of laws in this document, so reference it. Okay. How to calculate active ingredient from your label. So you have your label in front of you. It's gonna have a percentage of active ingredient and percentage of inert ingredients on the label, right? And then it may under that say like, if it's a liquid, for example, it may say this is like 0.5 pounds of product per 1 gallon or whatever. If it's dry formulation, it's a little bit easier to calculate, right? Okay, so the formulas here, it's pretty like, I think it's intuitive. Pounds of active ingredient in a container is the percent by weight by net contents. Yeah, so we have an example here. If our container's net contents are 50 pounds and the active ingredient of the concentration is 20 pounds, 0.2 times 50 equals 10 pounds of AI. And it's like pretty simple math. Some labels will spell it out for you on the label, right? Especially the like really acutely toxic chemicals tend to have this information already on the label. Like written, the math is done for you a lot of times. Okay. Another example of our containers net contents are 5 gallons, and there's 4 pounds of active ingredient per gallon. It's 4 times 5. Oh wait, sorry. Yeah, this.
Oh, I did the math wrong. Yeah. Yeah. No, that equals 20.
Should be.
That definitely equals 20, yeah.
I thought I was having a stroke or something,
Always
right?
double check your math.
All right. Note to us, we should fix the math.
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Now that we've gone through our, no pictures, right? Okay. Our blunder of the day, we can get to where this information is on top. I'll let you go. This is just an example of a label, okay? Also, if you're interested in what's licensed to sell in Hawaii and has a stamp on it, you can look at the HDOA's website and they'll have like current labels for you to look at, which is a very nice resource. Okay, cat liver. Remember this from the EPA list of this? Yeah? Yeah, okay, that's right here, right? Pretty easy, 2%. Okay? This is a liquid formulation, so it says 1 gallon consists of 0.15 pounds of abamectin. Okay, and this jug is 1 gallon, right? So you know how much abamectin is in this jug. Yeah, it says for you, like pretty simply here. This is where you're gonna find this on the label. Does this make sense for you guys? So if you have 2 active ingredients, you gotta look at both of them. Look at the CAS number. If you're on your laptop, it's super easy. You just like copy and then paste into list of this and it'll pop up which one it is. And pretty much any planning quantity or threshold planning quantity in any reportable quantity is like you need to start communicating with people if something happens, right? Or if you're planning to buy a lot. Okay. Questions on this?
What is EPA EST number?
Actually, I don't even know what the EPA establishment number is.
The establishment number has to do with the facility where the pesticide was manufactured. For our purposes, for the purposes of someone who uses a pesticide, the registration number is what's important. You don't need to worry about the establishment number.
Good information. Thank you, Max.
Great question.
Yeah.
There's some batches of chemical production that you need to be aware of, that maybe something that we can detect from the label, like there's some improvements on the product. Like for example, this has been restricted before, but now at this time it's not prohibited.
So
How can you find that?
So what's relevant with the pesticide you're using is not the most recent version of the label that you can find online. It's the label that's on the bottle itself. So if the label on the bottle itself says this is a restricted use pesticide, then that is a restricted use pesticide. You cannot use it unless you are a certified applicator. If that pesticide becomes unrestricted for some reason, then new labels won't have that restriction. People can buy it, but the old label is what matters when it comes to what you need to do for that pesticide. So for restricted use, it's a little bit different because that limits access to the chemical. You know, once a product is unrestricted, it's unrestricted anymore. Specifically, it's for like application differences. Like, so the maximum use rate might have increased from the new label compared to the old label. But if you have the old label, you follow the old label. It does not matter what the new label says. But yeah, excellent question.
I think Ronstar is an example we went through recently, right, where it changed status from non to restricted use, right?
I think that was just the license switched over to a different company, so it got a different EPA registration number.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
that also can happen.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Any questions on the label? Okay. Cool. Okay. I'll get into the next section here where we're talking about the RCRA law. It's another, like, you know, we went through the acronym already, but it's not an actual emergency response law, but you can see that the information for this was also on the list of lists. So I grouped it together earlier. This basically says that you as a company are classified a certain way in terms of producing hazardous materials. You're either an exempt small quantity generator, a small quantity generator, or a large quantity generator. And they classify chemicals differently. So there's like acutely toxic pesticides or chemicals of 2.2, like 2.2 pounds is the threshold that triggers your generator status changing, and this is a month-to-month basis. Or like you know, RCRA regulated pesticide, like a U pesticide, being 2,200 pounds. That's also per month. So you can see that there's like a few more orders of magnitude difference between a P and a U classified chemical. So it really matters like what you're using. Because 2.2 pounds of hazardous material can be pretty easy to go over in a month if you're not paying attention. And a note on this too, like if you're spraying and like you're like, I'm lazy to like rinse out this container, I'm just gonna make a big pile and deal with it in 5 years. Then in 5 years, you're like, dude, like I gotta get rid of all this stuff. It's a huge pile, and you try to get rid of it. Those unrinsed containers are now hazardous material, and now you have way over your 2.2 pounds or 2,200 pounds per month, right? So it's not talking about an average over a year, it's talking about this month. So if you're going through a lot of pesticide jugs or whatever, right? Or like you had a spill or something, it's better to have a little bit go out every month rather than a lot in 1 month, because then you go over this threshold, and then you have to go through a bunch of this compliance stuff with the EPA that you don't want to deal with. Okay, I think I'll go into it in the next slide. Okay, no, not this slide. One of the later ones. Okay, I'll just go through this. So if you want to know what like sources of information for if your pesticide is acutely toxic or not, you can look on the label. The MSDS is going to have this information. It's probably the best resource in the regulatory information section. And also, if you're like totally stumped, you can just look on the internet, look at the EPA list of lists for the active ingredient, and it'll tell you on there. Okay. All right. Kind of hoping another slide was for this one, but that's okay. Max, do you know where the slide with the P and the U is? Is that later or is that?
No, that was just previously.
Oh, I already passed it?
Yeah, so in the MSDS, it's
Right here, okay. Sorry, this is what I was looking for. We saw on the EPA list of lists, one of those active ingredients had a number associated with it on the far right column with a P on it, right? P indicates that it is an acutely toxic chemical. Okay, a U indicates that it's a regulated but not acutely toxic. So it's like a just a hazardous material, right? And that's what's gonna trigger your concern about this 2.2 pounds or 2,200 pounds per month, okay? So if it has a P next to it on the left side, right? That, you gotta really start paying attention to how much waste you're generating. So like any spill is like really gonna screw you. Any like unrinsed jug, or like rinsate that's piled up that you don't know what to do with it, something like that, like can start to be a problem for you. I'll go back another couple slides here so we can re-reference the list of this. You see this thing over here? This is why like I grouped these laws together because it has that P number next to this chemical. These other chemicals don't have that P, so they're 2,200 pounds, right? This one is 2.2 pounds per month. Okay. Also, okay. I know there's a slide on this somewhere, but I forgot where it is, so I want to say it now. To dispose of this stuff properly is pretty difficult in Hawaii. In other places in the US, municipal garbage systems can handle hazardous waste. In Hawaii, they cannot. So your two options for getting rid of hazardous waste in Hawaii, one, probably the best one, the cheapest option, and the easiest to access is the HDOA's disposal program. But there are some restrictions in there. It needs to be in an original container, right? So that does not mean that like you spilled some on the soil and you dug up the soil and put it in a bag, you can't bring it to them, okay? It has to be an original container, like you have some old pesticides you don't want to use anymore, or it's illegal to use now because it's so old or whatever, right? Like you can bring that to HDOA. They'll get rid of it for you for free. Option two, which is your only option for spill cleanup, and it's not a very attractive option, is, well, not only option for spill cleanup, okay. One of the options for spill cleanup is a company that is certified and they can dispose of it for you, and they'll be tracking the life cycle and stuff like that. You gotta pay them to get rid of it for you though. And remember, if you get rid of more than 2.2 pounds of acutely toxic substances in 1 month, you trigger a whole set of compliance stuff that you have to start dealing with, okay? So if you can give them 2 pounds every month, because you spill 10 pounds of AI or whatever, right? Like that's a better way to do it. Or if you do have a spill and you're able to apply it in a manner that's consistent with the labeling, and you like know how much you spilled, or I spilled 2 ounces on the soil, then I can do a soil drench, just mix it with a bunch of water and then drench it. That's a better way to deal with it too. As long as that manner of application is consistent with application methods in the label. Yeah. Okay. Now we're into the generator statuses. That high. This is where you want to be. You want to be in a conditionally exempt small generator status. This is like less rules for you to have to deal with and reporting and compliance and stuff like that. You want to be here. You have to identify all of the hazardous waste that you dispose of. Everyone has to do this, okay? You have to know how much you're getting rid of, and you want it to be below the thresholds. Okay, here's where the information is about Hawaii specifically. 2 options pretty much for free. You can apply it. Like if you rinse out your jug, you have rinsate, you can apply it in a manner consistent with the labeling as well. Never accumulate more than 1,000 kgs of hazardous waste on your property at any one time. Okay, if you start going over that, you trigger another status for yourself, and you don't want to deal with that. If you plan to ship hazardous waste, you are advised, but not required to, advise to, as a conditionally exempt small generator status, advise to fill out this form. Okay. Not required here, but if you become a small quantity generator, so you're producing this amount of stuff, or you go over a certain amount of waste in your inventory, you must create an EPI identification number. There's limits on how much you can store. Again, it's more than conditionally exempt, but now you have to start, the EPA knows who you are, they're gonna start checking in with you on like, oh, what are you generating this month, dude? And you must fill out this piece of paper anytime you ship anything. Okay? You want to be in this status. Okay? Nobody cares about you. You're doing things right. You're not producing a ton of like toxic waste, right? You want to be here. If you do go here for some reason, you know, you got to start the compliance treadmill. Okay, and then if you become a large quantity generator, there's too much stuff to list on this slide, but here's like the trigger that causes that to happen. Okay, a big spill will put you here. It's not where you want to be. You got everybody breathing down your neck. You got like, not in addition to the spill and all like those 3 or 4 agencies you have to connect with, you have this to deal with now too. So anyways. Yeah, any questions about this kind of stuff with the RCRA or emergency response laws? Everyone's sleeping already. Okay, I should have brought a coffee today. Basically, the method here is be very careful with what you have. Have your dealer deliver, don't spill. If you do mix or load, make sure it's on a mixing pad where you can like easily clean that up and use it in an application instead of having it create hazardous waste. Yeah, okay, that's the moral of the story. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure because like these laws all put everything on you. Okay, it's not about like someone else's responsibility. It's all you. Okay, so it's a lot. I will also try to get in contact with the Department of Health to do a deep dive into like RCRA kind of stuff too in the future, so we can have another workshop like this. Today is kind of just us giving a broad overview of all the laws that affect you as pesticide users. So we have like the pesticide specific laws, everyone knows, like, you know, read a label, all that. There's a lot of OSHA stuff that goes into it that you also have to comply with in the context of having hazardous materials. Like there's a field sanitation stuff, there's a HAZCOM, right? You have to have SESs, you have to have a plan, you have to communicate and train your employees. If you're using anything that requires a respirator, you need to follow the respiratory protection standard. If you're doing elevated work, you have to follow the elevated work, safety toe, all these things, right? With OSHA. Also with the emergency response laws, you know, there's a lot you have to know or at least be aware of also. If you are interested in getting rid of any pesticides, call Adam Williams at the Pesticides branch. You can get rid of your pesticides that you don't want if they are in the original container for free, if you go to them. And this very nice option that they have provided. I think, you know, you want to do your spiel on this, man, like,
yeah, basically what is to know is that we've received funding to continue this program more or less annually based on its resounding success last year. Looking at the stats that we have over there, we collected nearly 40,000 pounds of pesticides that were not going to be used. Those are no longer a threat to our community during emergencies. And at a total cost to the state of over $700,000. So you consider the amount of time and effort and cost that it would take you as an individual or as a private entity to deal with all of that hazardous waste that you may have on site. Now that's not a problem anymore. You can just surrender to us. We'll take care of it for you. And it's worth noting, as part of this disposal program, there is no enforcement action that will be taken if you like hand over a pesticide that you're not supposed to have because it's restricted use, you don't have a certification, or for any other reason. You will not get in trouble for surrendering your pesticides to us. We want you to engage in the program, so please do. Great. The last slide has our contact info.
oh yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Did you have the QR code for the survey on here? Or
No, I'll email.
Okay.
So this is our contact information for all of you. I do not have Randall's information up here. I have the information for Edmar Castillo. He is the compliance assistant specialist for HIOSH. He's the one who helped us develop these slides and added a lot of context to our initial presentation, which only had 2 HIOSH slides on it. So really big thank you to HIOSH for their involvement in this workshop, for making it even better than we could have imagined it being. We still have plenty of time. It's only a little bit after, it's 10:40. So plenty of time if you guys want to stick around, ask questions. We'll be available for the next 20 minutes at least. On your way out, please be sure to sign out. This now officially ends the workshop period at 10:40. So any sign-outs at this point will count. That's how you're going to get your CEU credits. And for anyone who may be listening to this webinar in the future, you can earn CEU credits by going to our website and taking a quiz, which is associated with this webinar. That will also be available for all of you as a reference in case you want to come back to any of this information. And if you want these slides, just email me. I can give you access to the slides themselves. There were a lot of pictures being taken. That's really awesome. That's really great. Those pictures might not be the best quality, so just let me know. I'll send you copies of the slides. So if you guys have any questions for the 3 of us, now is the time to ask. But if you guys are ready to, go home, you can go take your lunch break and get ready for the afternoon, by all means, please sign out. And thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you engaging and just showing up and being here. So